In the silent, icy depths of Westminster Abbey's royal vault, a lead coffin had lain untouched for centuries, its secrets sealed in darkness. But when investigators finally opened the tomb of Elizabeth I, England's legendary Virgin Queen, they uncovered something far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. The mighty queen who had dared kings, defeated the Spanish Armada, and reigned with ruthless power was now a monstrous imitation of what she used to be. What they found was not merely disquieting, it was horrific. Her corpse, already in decomposure for months, was a violent reminder of the real cost of monarchical authority. This wasn't the beautiful finale of England's golden age. This was a horror tale concealed under centuries of ritual and myth. It was 1603. Elizabeth I lay dying in Richmond Palace. For weeks, she had not allowed anyone to make her lie down, standing for hours, clutching a terror that few could comprehend. Those around her spoke in hushed tones that she had visions, visions of what would become of her body when her soul departed. She dreaded the bloody mutilations passed off as embalming, and she had good reason to fear. What they discovered centuries later was her worst nightmare, not only true but horrifically exaggerated. Her body had been subjected to a grotesque ceremony. Her organs were ripped out while she was still warm, her brain scooped out through her nose, and her dead body filled with spices and herbs like some royal Christmas dinner. And then there was the cruelest twist of fate. On top of her shattered corpse rested another coffin, that of her half-sister and lifelong enemy, Mary I, the very same Mary that Elizabeth had feared once upon a time, outlived and usurped. Now, in death as in life, they were piled like firewood, queens turned into meat. Their royal pedigree was meaningless to the worms that consumed them both. Elizabeth, the queen who had moved poets, led armies, and altered the shape of history, now existed only as a chemical process, slowly breaking down in her own bodily fluids. But this is not simply a ghastly story about death. It's a disturbing exploration into the very center of monarchy itself, where divine right of kings intersects with unstoppable rot of the human body. The atrocities revealed in her tomb destroyed illusions of royal immortality. So shocking were these revelations, they were entombed once again, this time in archives, considered too disturbing for the public eye. But now we bring them into the light. Get ready, because what you are about to hear will trouble your sense of England's greatest queen. Behind the golden throne lay a putrid body. Behind the scepter, a useless hand. Behind the crown, putrefaction. This is the reality that history attempted to sterilize. March 24th, 1603, Richmond Palace was filled with an unsettling stillness as Queen Elizabeth I lingered on the brink of death. For 45 years, she had ruled England with unparalleled willpower, and now she stood, literally, refusing to yield even to death itself. Her thin body swayed as her ladies held her up, willing to comply with her desire not to lie down. She feared that once she fell, she would never get up. This was the same queen who had endorsed Mary, Queen of Scots' death warrant, the queen who had outwitted the most deadly conspiracies of Europe's greatest courts. But now she was a scared old woman holding to the final shreds of authority. Her face, once immortalized in scores of portraits, was now a mask. White lead paint cracked and flaking, vermilion lips turned pale. Her red hair, now gray, had dropped out under her cumbersome wigs. Her arms were swollen with fluid, and she could no longer swallow. A purulent abscess in her throat had made her mouth a tomb of its own, filled with the stench and flavor of death, and still she dreaded what followed. Elizabeth had witnessed what happened to monarchs when they died. She recalled her mother, Anne Boleyn, tossed into a plain chest in a rush after execution. She'd heard the stories about her father, Henry VIII, bursting from his coffin, the swollen body bursting through sheets of lead. These images haunted her, and she pleaded that her remains be left alone. Her wishes were disregarded. Even as she fought to stay upright, royal embalmers readied their instruments, razor-sharp blades for cuts, long rods to insert into the skull and draw out the brain, gut hooks to empty her intestines. The royal court kept up appearances. Petitions were still brought before the Queen, though she could no longer reply. Musicians played in the background, as if music could cover the odor of death wafting through the air. On the 23rd of March, Elizabeth at last fell. Her long holdout had run its course. Her replacement, James VI of Scotland, was already riding south to take the throne by the time she did. The courtiers, who had sworn their loyalty forever, now rushed to secure their places under the new monarch. At 3 a.m., March 24th, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I passed away, not in grandeur, not in tranquility, but alone, left by everyone but a handful of duty-bound servants who remained behind, not love. And in a matter of minutes after her last breath, her body was no longer her own. The process had commenced, and what ensued was far from regal. What transpired is something even seasoned professionals weren't ready for. After the Queen's lifeless body was stripped of its royal robes, what lay beneath shocked the embalmers. Her once imposing form was now desecrated by age, by illness, and by years of poisonous cosmetics. Underneath the heavy base of white lead paint was skin full of lesions and sores. The makeup that once constructed her look had poisoned her slowly, eating away at the flesh she had struggled so hard to maintain. Her legendary countenance had deteriorated into a deformed mockery. Her aquiline nose protruded now like a keen beak. Her lips had retreated, giving way to a mouth filled with blackened, rotting teeth. Where there was once the visage of grandeur, there was left now a skull just covered by thin, translucent skin. Then there was the butchery. The first cut was made by the sergeant surgeon beneath the rib cage, cutting through fat and flesh in cool, practiced strokes. Immediately, the air reeked with a gut-wrenching odor, an intolerable mixture of rot, infection, and the sickening sweetness of rotten royal flesh drenched in years of excess. Incense was lit in desperation, but no perfume could overpower the odor of a rotting monarch. Each of her organs was taken out one by one, her heart enlarged and diseased, her liver fatty and swollen with stories of constant palace feasts. The doctors, in morbid curiosity, studied each organ for signs and portents. Some believed she had been poisoned. Others focused on her womb. So much the subject of political gossip throughout her reign, now shriveled and distorted, the so-called virgin womb no longer an enigma, but a rotting artifact. The worst part came with the removal of her brain. A long metal rod was pushed up her nasal passage, through bone and into her skull. Embalmers scooped up her brain in liquid form and pulled out clumps, a gray, fetid sludge dripping on the floor. Experienced attendants gagged and looked away. Having removed her organs, they now started the preservation ceremony. Her empty body was cleaned with vinegar and wine, then stuffed full of myrrh, frankincense, aloes, and sawdust. The empty space was sewn up with thick stitches, creating fat scars across her belly. Her face was rebuilt with wax and plaster to make her look like the queen at the height of her power. A bright red wig was fitted onto her skull. She looked serenely asleep from a distance, but close up she looked like something from a nightmare, a spice-filled wax husk masquerading as the former Great Elizabeth. The funeral was supposed to dazzle, to show the brilliance of monarchy, but behind the incense and the velvet, the reality seethed. Her body, no matter the efforts, was decaying fast. Unusual sounds could be heard from the closed coffin, gurgles and hisses created by the chemical processes within. The smell of rot followed the grand procession, a morbid reminder that queens also decay. Robert Cecil orchestrated each move with meticulous attention. The black-draped coffin was topped by a realistic effigy. 4 black-cloaked horses drew it, preceded by England's crème de la crème. Dignified nobles with stoic faces concealing their eagerness for patronage under the new king. Commoners sobbed on the streets, oblivious of the vile reality passing before them. The trip to Westminster Abbey was 4 hours long. In the spring sunlight, the spices and blood within the airtight lead coffin started to react with violence. Pressure increased as gases were created. Attendants, in fear of an explosion, silently made holes in the lead shell and spots to vent the building-up gases, covering up the holes before anyone could detect the hiss or scent the truth. Dr. Anthony, Dean of Westminster, who stood beside the coffin at the burial, would eventually admit in private journals that the noises emanating from the casket sent shivers down his spine. It creaked, it moved, it sounded alive. Over the tomb sat the effigy, a stately figure in wax. Below, however, Elizabeth's body had become something other, a black stew of meat and chemicals. The burial was hurried. As her coffin descended into the vault, there rang out a startling crack through the chapel. Some explained it away as the lead yielding. Others suspected the body had rolled violently. Whatever it was, those who were there acted with haste, closing the tomb with startling rapidity. In death, Elizabeth was laid on top of the very woman she had feared and deposed, her half-sister Mary Tudor. Bloody Mary, the Catholic queen she had replaced, who had once condemned Protestants to the stake. The enemies of the Reformation were now huddled together in the same small vault, consigned to share eternity. And there is more to it. Unusual occurrences ensued after the interment. Abbey staff started complaining of strange noises emanating from the vault. Not only decay, but scratching, knocking, as it was described. The alleged explanation from the authorities? Rodents. But those who had stood close to that tomb knew something more. The corpse had been inadequately preserved. Gases built up within the coffin, warping the lead. As it strained and creaked, it made sounds. Sounds all too human in timbre. The vault was left alone for 265 years. Its secrets were allowed to rot in silence until in 1868, Victorian curiosity opened it up again. Dean Arthur Stanley, compelled by historical obsession, instructed the tomb be reopened. What the investigators discovered that October morning would not only validate centuries-old gossip, it would brand their memories for life. The first challenge was chaos. When they broke through the Henry VII chapel floor, they encountered carnage. Water had leaked in over the centuries, rotting wood, distorting coffins, and intermingling bones in a macabre communion. The noble dead, once confined with dignity, now were knotted together in a common pit of decay. Death had made nobles and commoners equal. Dean Stanley's private account is reminiscent of a Gothic horror story. The odor, he wrote, was unimaginable, not old death, but living rot. It was as if rot had been put on hold centuries ago, now picking up where it left off with a vengeance. Dressed in primitive breathing apparatuses, the team went down into what he referred to as a charnel house of monarchy. They discovered Elizabeth's coffin under Mary's. Both had collapsed, half opened. Time and weight had cemented the two lead shells together. The arch-enemies were now joined physically and melted into one. When workers separated them with a saw, new horrors unfolded. With each handling, the closed interiors were agitated, sending forth fresh waves of rot. Elizabeth's coffin, when opened, was even more terrible than their worst imaginations. The embalming had spectacularly failed. The spices, herbs, and bodily fluids had coalesced into a wet black tar that preserved patches of skin but dissolved others. Her body was a grotesque combination of mummied tissue, liquefied organs, and crystallized shards of resin. Most chilling of all was the condition of her face. The death mask, built out of wax and plaster, had dissolved. The artificial skin had merged with the actual. All that was left was a partially preserved skull topped with the bright red wig, a false beauty crown placed upon a decaying face. What the investigators discovered next was more than horror. It was transformation in the grip of time. Elizabeth's jaw had separated, still clamped to stumps of her burnt teeth. The embalming, meant to preserve her, had instead done the very opposite. Some process had sped along some decomposition, stopping others in their tracks. The evacuation of her organs had created empty vessels within her cadaver, which were filled with putrefactive fluids and gases. Sealed within a lead coffin, her body had effectively marinated in itself for centuries. The effect was not preservation, but reconstitution. She had stewed in her own essence, breaking down and reforming into something entirely new and grotesque. Her fabled coronation ring, reportedly cut from her rotting hand on the day of death, now rested free among the broken bones. Bits of cloth had bonded to rotten flesh, creating a mosaic impossible to separate. Even the golden orb and scepter interred with her, tokens of authority, were corroded and tarnished by the acids of the royal decomposition. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery was this: decomposition wasn't over. It had simply paused. When the remains were exposed to fresh air, something terrifying happened. The tissues, stable for centuries, began to collapse and decay right before the team's eyes. It was as if the Virgin Queen was dying all over again. Her second death, this time witnessed by shocked Victorian gentlemen who thought themselves prepared for anything. Panic set in. The researchers rushed to record everything before the process picked up pace further. They made drawings, took measurements, and gathered samples. Dean Arthur Stanley wrote words that have troubled historians since in his last journal entry. "We have looked upon the face of mortality and found it wearing a crown. Would that we had left it in peace." The psychological impact was instantaneous. Victorian England, with all of its restrictive mourning customs and preoccupation with the dignity of death, had to deal with a stark reality. Even the greatest kings and queens disintegrated into monstrosity. Dr. William Hartley, chief anatomist, went on to admit, in his own personal diary later, that the photographs haunted his own sleep for years. Chemical tests of Elizabeth's body uncovered something extremely disturbing. The embalming had caused unnatural chemical reactions. Her body had generated compounds never before found in nature, some with grotesque antimicrobial capabilities that preserved tissue in an uneven manner, and others that actually sped up the rot. Elizabeth's body was now a laboratory of the bizarre. Rather than seeping smoothly from flesh to bone, her body had decomposed, mummified, dissolved, and reformed in loops. Hartley called it recursive putrefaction. Death nested inside death. Preservation perverted into perversion. Psychologically, this changed Dean Stanley profoundly. He preached differently. He talked more about vanity, the emptiness of earthly power. He swore he would never uncover another royal vault in his lifetime and asked for a simple, unadorned burial when he died. The results called to mind haunting questions. If Elizabeth, who had the most sophisticated embalming of her time, deteriorated to such a horrid condition, what of the rest? What was hidden behind the marble monument tombs of royalty? Additional investigation showed high concentrations of methane, hydrogen sulfide, and other poisonous gases within the vault, gases generated by centuries of royal decay. Certain researchers subsequently wrote of dizziness, hallucinations, a feeling of foreboding that seemed to radiate from the very walls themselves. Photography was there, but Stanley prohibited it. He said certain terrors must never be frozen in pictures. Sketching alone was permitted, tentatively, selectively. One sketch, sealed away in the Abbey's records, depicts a human figure huddled like melting wax, topped by a wig still curled, even though the face underneath had melted. Even Queen Victoria, who had been sent a highly censored copy of the report, was appalled. She discreetly called for reform of royal funeral rites, easier embalming, quicker burial. The medical establishment was also shocked. Mortuary science was reworked to give future events like this a miss. Among the handful of recovered artifacts was a small lidded box. Within was what police thought to be Elizabeth's heart. But no longer flesh. The organ had crystallized, combined by lead, mercury, and fluids of the body into a gemstone of rot. A poisonous gem, lovely and horrifying. Her heart had literally turned to stone. One final bit of irony for the death of a queen who lived by fire. Other organ searches brought a horrifying find under the chapel floor. Ancient burial compartments had perforated. Their contents had penetrated the foundation stones. Monarchy itself was dissolving into the abbey. Certain stones, when struck, some of the workmen said, yielded dark fluid matter that reeked of spices and death. Lord Salisbury had all records sealed for 100 years, but the truth, like rot, surfaced. The Gothic revival had attempted to sentimentalize the past, to admire the grandeur of history, but here it faced the ugly physical fact of royal mortality. Subsequent research confirmed that the embalming mixture applied to Elizabeth was toxic: mercury, lead, arsenic. She had been embalmed not as a saint, but as a toxic waste dump. During the life of Elizabeth, she had said, "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." But in death, neither. Her stomach was nothing but black sludge, her heart a lethal crystal, her victories, her orations, her glory, all overshadowed by her demise in that lead-lined coffin. The more we know about her final physical state, the more difficult it is to gaze at her portraits without observing the reality behind. Collapsed tissue under wax, a royal mask covering decay. The tale does not simply alter how we remember Elizabeth. It alters how we contemplate death. Nowadays, cremation is what most people prefer. Natural burials are becoming the norm. Elaborate embalming is losing popularity. Without knowing it, the above trends go back to terrors discovered in Elizabeth's tomb. Her repulsive afterlife warned us all, you cannot be sneaky with death with chemicals. You only misshape it. And in trying to stay eternal, Elizabeth ended up becoming something else altogether. Not a mummy, not a skeleton, but a third thing, unnatural, unforgettable. The queen who ruled for an era now remembered as a tragic alchemy of beauty, power, and decay. A symbol of how even the brightest crowns eventually corrode. Now, millions of visitors tread the vacant halls of Westminster Abbey, awed by its glass, its high arches, and its marble tombstones. They seek history, piety, and majesty. What they don't know is this: they are treading over a tomb. Westminster Abbey isn't just home to the dead. It is constructed from them. Each inch of its holy spaces is filled with the slow rot of royalty. Each breathed prayer ascends through air that has been flavored by the unseen breath of rot that is centuries old. The structure is a concealed mausoleum, one that studiously excludes the ghastly realities that exist beneath its flagstones. And below those flagstones rests the greatest irony of all. Elizabeth I, England's Virgin Queen, who lived her life tormented by the specter of death, was completely justified in her fear. Every terror she envisioned occurred, and worse. The embalming procedures she so desperately sought to escape were performed with savage efficiency. The physical decay she fought so hard against until her dying breath came for her with unnatural ferocity. And the privacy she so actively protected in life, defiled, her corpse uncovered, examined, and drawn by prying Victorian eyes hundreds of years later. And so, in this ghastly destiny, she achieved a grotesque and awful kind of immortality, whereas other kings are remembered for their conquests, reforms, or victories. Elizabeth persists in memory for what she became. Her decay was so terrible that it ensured her a sort of perpetual remembrance. She wasn't embalmed, she was altered, not into legend, but into something more enduring, rot, myth, and chemical fact. As we come to the end of this vault of royal terror, we are left with ghostly visions, a heart made of crystal, flesh melted into tar, a locked coffin remade into a twisted chemical reactor, and above all, we are left with one truth. Under the rocks of even the most sacred sites lies the same destiny that awaits us all. Power cannot shield from decay. Majesty cannot avoid chemistry. Elizabeth's golden age did not finish off with a burst of glory, but with the gradual breaking down of her body into sludge and gas. Even today her body still mutates in that locked obscurity. The change never ceased. It merely slowed. She remains there, still rotting, still transforming into something else. And we who know the truth can never traverse those consecrated corridors in the same fashion ever again. With every step, monarchy is crushed beneath. With every breath, atoms that once made up a queen might be breathed in. She is gone, and everywhere, not here, not there, present and absent, strung out in time and stone. Trying to keep her alive, they made her immortal, but not as they hoped. What they discovered in her coffin was greater than grotesque. It was a revelation. It wasn't just the look of a rotten queen that frightened. It was the meaning of what her end told us about ourselves. In that box of lead didn't rest just a dead monarch, but the death of fantasy, the rot of all human conceit, the slow, filthy unwinding of all we pretend to make us invincible. Elizabeth reigned over an age of gold. She defied empires. She remolded a nation. And yet ultimately she came to the same stuff as us all: bone, fluid, gas, dust. Her heart was turned into an ornament of poison, her belly into a broth of chemical action, her flesh and alchemy went awry. And in that horrific process we behold the reality of ourselves. Because the terror isn't what death inflicted on Elizabeth. The terror is that it will inflict it upon us. We act out tales of victory, construct legacies, proclaim grandeur, but each action is taken by bodies already in gradual decay. We're all moving towards the same tomb. Elizabeth's destiny offers us no illusions. It shreds the royal raiment and reveals what is underneath every crown, every speech, every monument: a skull, a heart, a stomach, a timeline. The Victorian detectives who broke into her vault in 1868 did not reveal merely a body. They did a service to mankind. They ripped away the veil. They confronted us with the common fact of death. Their horror was our knowledge, their trauma our learning. We cannot forget what they beheld. We depart Elizabeth where she was discovered, still in her lead coffin, buried beneath the abbey, still on her centuries-long chemical journey towards oblivion. But we must leave behind what she taught us. Now every mirror reveals not only our face, but the skull beneath it. Every moment of triumph is darkened by its perishability. Every life, however bright, ends the same way. Maybe the real message of Elizabeth's death is not despair, but clarity. We are not gods, not kings, not chosen. We are flesh, and flesh is bound by the same principles as all living things. Elizabeth, who strove so desperately to be something more than human, ended up confirming she was precisely that: utterly, agonizingly, beautifully human. Her terror is ours. Her destiny is ours. Death's democracy makes us all equal. What was discovered in Queen Elizabeth I's coffin was greater than a rotting corpse. It was a reflection, a one we all must gaze into and take stock of what we behold.